What's going on, folks? This is Balaji, and welcome to another edition of the Demand Wars. Now, in the hot seat today, we have a man who is no stranger to you. He claims B2B doesn't have to be boring. He's a B2B marketer trying to live to 150 years old, 50 years as a marketer, 50 digging for fossils, and 50 for exploring space. Okay, we're going to have to get into that. He's a radically introverted B2B marketer who creates videos every day. How does that compute? He's so introverted, he changed his LinkedIn job status to unemployed just so salespeople would stop pitch slapping him. Please help me welcome the never boring, semi funny, future space explorer, Tim, the two man Davidson. What's going
Wow,
on,
that
Tim?
was the best intro I've ever heard. You have something there. You could be the intro person for every intro ever.
You
I
think
am.
so?
Oh yeah,
I'm,
you
I'm,
should.
I'm that might be my LinkedIn status
That could
next
be your
year.
pivot. You might be able to do some big things there.
I'm liking it. I'm liking it, Tim. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I am excited to be here. Very, very excited. How are you doing?
Man, I'm excited to be here as well. I want to dig in before we really get into the questions to this piece that a lot of people are going to be intrigued by. We've been seeing your videos for the past year or so, all the various series that you've been creating on TikTok and LinkedIn. So when I heard you mention somewhere that you are naturally introvert, I think you went to CXL maybe a couple of months
Mm.
ago, and you talked about going to that from an introvert standpoint. I'm like, how is this dude like everywhere in videos, and yet he's not necessarily extroverted? How does that work?
Well, I think it's because I have a screen. This is the video camera that blocks it, right? Like for me, and I know everyone has different definitions of introverted.
Yeah.
Um, I say I'm pretty introverted because I like to stay home as like it's yeah, I get a lot of energy by being by myself. Um, I do think there's some I can get like warmed up with people,
Mm,
and that
mm,
helps. Like especially if I know them.
hmm.
Um, but I'm just naturally introverted. Like the best day of my life would be like just hanging out at home by myself, which is
I
weird,
love it.
but it's kind of true. Um,
Hey, I love it. I
yeah,
love it.
I think I think I can create the videos, and I think I've been able to use because it's literally just like my phone that instead of like talking to someone. Even like
Mhm.
lives aren't that bad, but if I was like in front of people in an event, I'd be folding right now. Like that's just really scary to me.
I think that gives permission to a lot of marketers. Sometimes marketers are accused of maybe avoiding. We've got marketers who are extroverted, by the way, but maybe compared to our sales counterparts, we don't necessarily seek out the face to face, the one on ones, or the one to many interactions as often as maybe we should. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts, Tim, around this whole concept of marketers actually creating content, intentionally creating content in order to become better marketers. Do you feel like since you started creating all these videos on TikTok and LinkedIn, that's actually improved your marketing skills?
Yes, and it's not like so. I know I've seen other people post about like there was like some controversy, not even controversy, but saying, all right, the best marketers, the best, it can be any department. The best marketers, let's say for this example, are creating content. That's not
Mm,
true because there is really good marketers. They're just not creating content. That
mm,
said, I will say, I do think if you take the same marketer, one's creating content, one's not, the one creating content will be better because they'll be learning faster and they'll actually spend, like, there's a lot of things I'll do to like test within marketing that I can justify the time even more so because I can create the content from it.
hmm.
So I think marketers are innovating faster when they're creating content because they're learning, they're getting feedback from people. They can ask like if you ask a question on LinkedIn, it's so interesting to see what you get back.
Hmm.
And you can use that as a marketer to innovate the marketing you're doing.
Right.
So I do think creating content just allows you to be outside of just the innovation part, but like be a better writer, figure out how to say things in the way they should, get more insights from your customers. There's just so many benefits there. That said, it does take a lot of time, so you're taken away from other things sometimes. But
Yeah.
I do think there's a lot of value in creating content because you can learn very fast from it.
That's interesting, Tim. I saw a post on LinkedIn today where someone said that the fastest way to learn, this is getting to your point about innovating and learning faster by being a content creator. They said the fastest way to learn is to create content, but to not necessarily put out the right answer every time. They said actually putting out the wrong answer is going to allow you to learn faster because people on the internet love to be critics. But maybe saying that
Yes.
a little less gently, you do get a lot of feedback. You can have a thought rattling around in your head that sounds cogent, but the moment you put it out there, it bounces off of 10, 20 different people, and it feels like that sharpens your perspective.
Yeah, 100%. I also think people just love to be right. So if you do put, like, to your point, if you put something out that's wrong, people will correct you. Like if you put a spelling out that's wrong, it's really funny with the kind of feedback you get back there. I really
This
don't
is
think
true.
that stuff matters, but to your point though, you can get so much feedback. Even it doesn't even have to be creating content per se. Like even just comments on
Mm,
LinkedIn are very interesting because if you say something and then like it ends up being like the first one that everyone sees, you'll get feedback on that too. If
right,
you start seeing a comment that everyone likes, you know, like, oh,
right,
okay, maybe there's something there. Or if you get
right.
comments on the comment about things that are different or like, oh, that's wrong, then you
Yeah.
know you can learn from that too.
No, that's really true. That's really true. So Tim, we're gonna jump into the demand wars questions in just a bit. I do want to ask and get your take on one more thing. You've been one of the more prolific content creators on LinkedIn, specifically in this space of B2B content having permission to be entertaining. And I think a lot of us maybe would love to be that person who's like the funny person in the room, but what if we don't feel funny? I mean, like, how do you actually go from maybe being funny to your kids or your spouse to actually putting jokes or funny material out live in public?
Yeah. So for me, naturally, I've always grown up. I wasn't like a class clown, but I naturally just gravitated towards humor, even in some like
Mm.
places where I probably shouldn't have humor at all. So luckily for me, like that's a trait I've learned over time, or I guess you can call it a skill sometimes. But I also think anyone can kind of learn it. I do think you just need to understand it better. I think one way I do that is like you can follow like a Joe Rogan or any of the comedians, and like especially the ones that are talking about like how what their process looks like. Those I
Hmm.
really examine very closely because I just think it's very interesting how they do things like that. But even it doesn't always have to be humor. It could be slight sarcasm. It could be something that's just more personable. I think when I say like BB doesn't have to be boring, humor's great, but I also think there's other place where you can be like just more personable and give like even just like misspellings. I just think people like to jump on that, and I don't think that's a huge deal. I'm not saying go out and misspell things, but I don't think it's a big deal.
Yeah.
I will say it's something you have to probably learn, and I think you can look at, or even if you're on TikTok, you can just look at like comedy skits and just learn from those.
Mm.
I think that's a big way I've been able to learn like how to do things like that. Like I've done, like one of the videos I did was B2B Fear Factor. That's basically it's obviously based off of Fear Factor, but it's because I saw someone else on TikTok make something a skit about Fear Factor.
Mm.
It was very easy to kind of look at that and just put it in my perception.
I love that. I love that. There's another conversation that I was in a few days ago, Tim, where um, a lady was talking about the myth about being busy all the time being a good thing. A lot of us have worked at companies where the culture is to
Mhm.
always look busy, to always be busy doing something, and but what that does is it sort of reduces space for thinking, it reduces space for creativity, and it reduces the opportunity to be a content consumer. So it almost sounds like you're suggesting, in order to refine my palate for something that's funny or entertaining, I need to be consuming more of that type of content.
Yes and no. Uh, don't get me wrong. I have had those moments where I'm addicted and I just like go through things and I look up and I don't even know what time it is. Um, but you can look at it like any way. You really only need maybe 20 minutes a day, not
Mm.
even.
Mm.
It just depends on like what your feed is, right? Like if you can cultivate a good feed, or
Oh.
you can look at specific things. Even on LinkedIn, you follow the right people. It's all about figuring out how to cultivate the things you want to look at,
Huh.
so that you're really focused in on that, so you're not spending too much time on it.
I like that. That's actually really helpful. Okay, cool. So, Tim, with your permission, we're going to jump right into the demand war. So, as a
Let's do it.
reminder, we're bringing together our best and favorite minds on demand creation to help us figure out how to do demand creation in 2023. So, you ready to get put into the gauntlet, buddy?
Oh yeah.
All right, let's go for it. He's ready. I'm ready. Let's jump in. The first question, folks, is desert island marketer. So, Tim, you have a $1,000 a month budget. You've been dropped onto a deserted island. You've got a laptop. You've got internet access. That's all you got. And you are marketing for a B2B company. Let's go to market. How are you going to manage going to market on a very limited budget?
It's going to be LinkedIn organic. And obviously, you don't really have to spend that $1,000 for LinkedIn organic, except for maybe some help for like video editing, or if you have to get like a video editing software. I really think LinkedIn organic's just, and it keeps going. It doesn't stop. Like 2 years ago, I thought it was just like, oh, this is going to die down like everything else. It's so much opportunity still. It's crazy what you can do on LinkedIn, as a founder, a CEO, a marketing person, and any department. I think LinkedIn Organics definitely the play there, and then that $1,000 would be spent on, I mean, if I'm on a desert island, probably food to live. Well, that's not possible, is it? But but like some help. So like maybe some freelancers or something that is, to help you get more out of your content.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so LinkedIn organic. Now the question a lot of folks might ask is what do you do if you don't yet have followers or a following? Actually, there's a lot of people here who are saying, "Okay, I want to start posting regularly on LinkedIn, but I don't have the 3,000 or the 5,000 or 10,000 followers." It feels like I'm spitting into the wind essentially. What do those sorts of content creators do?
Yeah. So, as you can imagine, everyone starts. Well, as you know, everyone starts at zero, right? So
Mhm.
if you're just starting off and you start creating content, posting it, I would, I forgot what the exact limit is, but start connecting with people that you want to talk to. So if
Mhm.
you're marketing to marketers, look up director of marketing, director of demand gen, and start connecting with those people. A lot of people will connect back. It, it's just really cool on LinkedIn how people do that. So I would do that every day, but I would also look for the creators in your space, that are, the creators, the big people with the big following that have, let's say for like marketing, Dave Gerhardt. And anytime they post, you can set up like a notification, then go in and try and comment in there. Uh, do that every day, and you'll start getting a lot more views on your comments. You'll start getting feedback on those comments, and you can use those for content. Those connections also help because you end up getting followers from those connections if they connect with you. Um, it's a daily grind, and it's still a daily grind at all times. But there's just so much opportunity in those two spots of comments and just connecting with your buyers.
Mm. So you're connecting with the right people. You are turning on notifications on their posts, and then you're commenting on those
Mhm.
posts. What types of content? I've seen you create a fair amount of video. I've seen some reports that have suggested different types of content attract more or less engagement and visibility on LinkedIn. Are there particular types you would recommend?
I think you need all of it, really.
Hmm.
I used to just do primarily text posts. Text versus video, for the most part, does get a lot more reach on the text part. Same with images. Like text and images are probably. I don't know if there's enough. I don't have enough data on like images versus text, but I
Mhm.
do know those get a lot more reach than a video. That said, video is just more personable. People will connect with it better. You might have better engagement. Like the DMs I get, 80% talk about a video rather than a text post. So I do think there's a deeper connection that you get from there, but I also think you need both, because that reach from the text and the image posts are going to get you maybe more followers than, or connections, or people like engaging with it. And then when they see your next video or your next post, which is a video, they might actually view it because they saw your text post. I think I really do think you need all of them. I haven't done much document ads or like the slideshow ones. I did one for the first time in a long time recently, but I do think you need all of it, because I do think there's a part for all of it. But to your question, text definitely get a lot more reach than video.
Gotcha.
But video is more personal. People understand who you are. It's just going to take some time for people to understand, like, to get more reach on your videos than you would with text.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay, cool. So, $1,000 a month, you're spending most of it on video editing software and freelancers and getting that content on LinkedIn Organic. That's perfect. So that's a situation where we have a limited budget, which a lot of people are going to have going to the new year. Here's the next challenge on Demand Wars. We call this one, Tim, 3, 3, and 3. So you've been tasked to create demand, but fast. Every marketer's favorite word. Okay. So how are you actually going to create that demand? I want you to answer this 3 different ways. How do you create demand in 3 days, in 3 weeks, and then in 3 months? All right. So let's work through each of those scenarios one at a time. So the first is you've only got 3 days. Maybe it's the end of the year. You got to create demand super fast. This is the Tasmanian Devil special. How are you doing it in just 3 days?
Is the budget still the $1,000?
No,
or
in
like
this
you have
case,
budget?
you pretty much, Tim, have an unlimited, within reason, budget. So budget is not your limit now. The only limit is time.
Okay. At 3 days, depending on my buyer, I'm probably going to try to get on, and I'll pay whatever I need to get on a podcast or a show that has the biggest reach to my buyers. I have 3 days. So like, and this is not B2B, but like, if I can get on Joe Rogan's podcast, you'll get a lot of views in 3 days.
That's true.
I can tell you that much.
That's true.
So that for the 3 days, I'm trying to get on something like that. I'm trying to get something that has a big following, because people will subscribe to it and they'll get the notification on their phone. Oh, this new podcast, this new show just dropped.
Right.
I'm trying to get on that, and a lot of times you have to pay if it's especially that in 3 days. But just make sure you pay to get on that or sponsor it in some way. But I think that's the biggest thing you can do in that short of a time.
Yeah, that I like that one a lot. I like that idea. I think a lot of times marketers get approached by well-meaning CEOs who say, "Why don't we just do XYZ? Why don't we just give away a car or some other big idea?" And sometimes the hesitation from the marketer standpoint might be, "Okay, if you give me the budget, I can do that, and we will get the attention, we'll get the reach. But then what? What's the actual message? Do we have a unique point of view? Do we have something that is going to be resonant?" How do you think through, Tim, and considering working at Directive? I'm sure you have clients sometimes who come to you guys, they've got budget to spend, but maybe haven't dialed in their marketing message or their offer. How do you help clients work through that?
Yeah, so that's very common. It's very, very common. Even like the big companies do this. They just don't have their message. It's like very bland. The first thing is you got to do is like your research. You got to talk to your customers. You can also just do like a win-loss analysis on your CRM, just to see. Because a lot of times if you look in that, you'll see certain industries or certain companies that you do really well with, that stick with you the longest, that you just have great relationships with. So at least for Directive, like when we niched down to 4 software companies, we saw a lot more growth because we were for a specific type of industry. And all our marketing went towards that, our messaging, all that. For a lot of companies, there's a lot of space to do that, because like you're not going to beat out HubSpot or Salesforce, But if you're a CRM for fintech, you're going to get more traction there because you're specific and everything's tailored towards that industry or those, or even if it's like, let's just say like, I don't know if this would be possible, like CRM for CS, like customer success managers, like something very different because you can't beat out HubSpot and Salesforce, but you can be very unique and niche down to a certain industry or a certain spot right there.
Right.
That's where you're
Right.
going to get like a little bit more traction because all those, and I think Pep Laja talks
Mm-hmm.
about this. The first movers, they got that spot. Now it's time to find a different area within that you can take over.
That makes a ton of sense. That makes a ton of sense. Okay, so for those 3 days, we're trying to get on the biggest show that we can. We're bringing in a unique point of view, ideally niched or niched down. That's cool. All right, now what if we have a little bit more time? We got almost a month, 3 weeks. How are you going to
Three
create
weeks.
demand in 3 weeks?
I got 3 months down in just the 3 weeks. Oddly enough, I do think part of it is that same strategy. Is how do we get on or build relationships with those big shows, those big podcasts? Because I just
Mm-hmm.
think there's a lot of opportunity there. Because 3 weeks is still not a lot of time, right? You
No,
need to there's a lot
no.
you need to do. Um, I think that's a big one. Is still the shows or podcasts. I would, depending on the category, you could probably launch some sort of like some demand capture channels. So if there's very specific ones, you could probably see some traction in 3 weeks
Mm.
on Google Ads.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also think you need to at least, if you start LinkedIn, if you launched LinkedIn today, you could see some low hanging fruit within that first 3 weeks.
Mm.
So I think those are the big 3 areas. Like again, the big shows or podcasts in your industry, the LinkedIn ads, and then depending on your category or the demand for your category,
Right.
demand capture like a Google Ads.
You know, this is intriguing, and I agree with. I like the way that you're thinking about these challenges of how you get that momentum, that traction really quickly, whether it's 3 days or 3 weeks. I kind of sort of wonder how many B2B companies default to going to these existing platforms that have existing audiences versus hitting performance marketing channels like a Google Ads, for example, and spending a lot of their budget there. How do you think companies, B2B companies, are thinking about paid marketing versus some of these other vehicles?
So right now it's probably wildly different because budgets are getting cut. But historically, there's been just a big push on paid budgets
Hmm.
because you have bigger growth goals, and a lot of times you have one or two channels that are working well, but they just don't scale. But they force it because you have bigger growth goals and you don't have any other channels right now. So a lot, historically, people just push the channels that are they start and see some sort of success for it with to hit their growth goals. Now that could be depends on the company, but it could be Google Ads, it could be Google Ads paid search, or it could be LinkedIn ads. It does depend, but a lot of times you're trying to scale the unscalable, which has never really worked, unfortunately.
You know, you had a video not too long ago, Tim, where you talked about how marketing isn't magic. And a lot of us marketers have been on the other end of that request, which is basically it's sort of what we're walking through now. It's create that
Yeah.
demand, create it really, really quickly, and not only bring people that match our ideal persona, but hey, they better be ready to buy. They better be ready to convert. Why do you think there's such a dichotomy between marketing's understanding of the buyer journey and either sales or maybe the executive suite's understanding of what they would like to see buyers go through?
Yeah, I think that the big gap is eh, there's probably a big gap in the sense of like how things have always been done, in the
Hmm.
sense of like HubSpot made the rule book on like content downloads, and all these big brands can do all those things because they have big brands. Or Google Ads has always been really good for a lot of B2B companies, but how people buy has changed. So I think there's still a lot of what has worked works. Same with like outbound sales and things like that.
Mm.
But the way people buy it is just different now. And I think there's still, especially execs, are just still stuck in that mindset.
Mm.
I also think that the growth goals are, from my experience, a lot of B2B companies have huge growth goals,
Yep.
and they just always continue to increase over and over and over again. So you have to do things that are just kind of old school to track everything to those, so you can actually scale it, which never works, but it's just like this delusion that keeps continuing. It's an interesting thing, but also sales. A lot of salespeople grew up not having a marketing help. It was kind
Ah.
of, they had to source their own deals. So I do think marketing and sales, or sorry, so sales, I do think a lot of people have just grown up having to source their own deals. So they don't really think marketing. They just have a different mindset in that way.
Mhm. No, that's actually really, really insightful. I've gotten into studying. I've always been fascinated with human psychology and buyer psychology as pertains to marketing. And one of the things that I learned a long time ago is that it's really difficult to change someone's mind. You could
Hmm.
confront them with data that's contrary to what they believe, and they will just justify their belief another way. It's a
Yeah.
little easier to meet people, I think, to meet people where they are first, and then slowly sort of gravitate them to maybe adjacent ways of thinking about the problem. So, yeah, what you're describing maybe is sales led motions at a lot of B2B companies. And I feel like it's been a long journey in helping some of our leaders of these companies get more of an understanding of buyer psychology, especially since the underlying behavior, like you've described, has changed.
Yeah. No, that's a great point.
Yeah. Okay. So, Tim, we talked through 3 days. You got us through 3 weeks. Now we're going to give you a whole quarter. You got a whole 90 days, 3 months to create demand. How are you going to do that? Budget is no option.
Yeah. So what I'm doing here is creating content and then scaling it on LinkedIn. I think that's your biggest play. I think it's because if you have unlimited budget, you can get in front of all your buyers however many times you need a
Mm.
day. Just creating really good content that answers our questions, talks about your unique perspective, and just scaling it to your buyers every day. Changing out the creative, because if we have unlimited budget, we can get enough creative, we can get enough content that we can really scale it and move it to our buyers. I think you can, if you had all those pieces and you're able to do that
Hmm.
every day, change out the frequency so there's no bad frequency in there. I think you could do that in 3 months and start seeing some really good demand. If your content's
So,
good. If the content's good.
that's a good point. Okay, so and I like that you pointed it out. So we're gonna assume that the content is good. I love that you called out FAQs. So sort of addressing common questions. That might be more if we want to use the funnel terms, middle of funnel type content. Expressing that unique perspective. Some people maybe have called that a strategic narrative or a unique point of view. That's awesome. What about attribution? Again, because you have the benefit of working at an agency, you have clients that are likely asking you these sorts of questions every day. If a marketer goes to their executive and says, I want to spend X thousands of dollars on LinkedIn this quarter, and I'm going to put out all this great content, but it's not necessarily going to have a call to action or a link that people can click. How should marketers navigate the attribution question?
There is a lot of ways to answer this. I think it's probably a multiple of everything. So in this scenario, where it's 3 months. Uh, let's just say we take a timestamp of today, and then in 3 months we see like We take a timestamp on everything you can. Uh, Demo requests, website traffic, everything you can think of. Just take a timestamp today, and in 3 months, you'll be able to see like, all right, what's that difference? The other parts is like your form, having like a "How did you hear about us?" Question on there. I do think there's still a lot of play in like attribution platforms or using like HubSpot attribution. I think you can still make references to things like certain pages that people usually click or are on before converting or something like that. I also think there's a huge benefit in, so if you use like a recording, like a gong or a chorus that records the calls, I think you can grab a lot of insights from there, especially if you like sales team asks like, oh, how'd you come to us, like what, or a lot of times, especially if you're marketing to marketers, they'll just explain like how they got to you. So there's a lot of insights you can gather from that. But I think it's like a accumulation of just all those things, but also just being active in Slack channels, and you can see, when your company is mentioned, or you can look at comments on the content and things like that, and make sure it's like your buyer and all that. I think it's the accumulation of all those things, and truthfully, having a exec team that just kind of gets it.
That does help.
It's a very big uphill battle if they are really not understanding it at all.
Very true. Very true. Very true. Cool. All right. So I appreciate you walking us through that. I think that's going to spark a lot of creative ideas for marketers watching this who need to generate pipeline quickly. It's interesting because usually there's a sprint to the finish line in Q4, but in my experience, even Q1 can be a little bit of a sprint as well, because people put so much energy into Q4. They're not necessarily putting out programs and campaigns that are sort of seeding the pipeline for the next quarter, and they end up having to sprint again in the first quarter of the year. So what you're sharing here is really helpful. All right, cool. So Tim, we're going to jump into the next question. There's this idea, Tim, of marketing like a media company. So we've all got Netflix, we've all got Hulu or Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, probably have too many of these streaming services. I know I do. And lately, marketers have started to toy with this idea. What if I treated my content as a product? What if I marketed like a media company? So if a B2B client came to you, Tim, and said, okay, in 2023, we want to market like a media company, what's the playbook? What does that look like? How do you advise them?
I think you keep it simple. I know there was, especially in COVID, I know there was some companies that made like TV shows, like Netflix style shows. I don't know how they did. I think that's just too complicated. I would just keep it simple. I think you should start like a podcast or a live show. I do think you should definitely do that. Have a subject matter expert there. It could be your CEO. It could be anyone that's really the subject matter expert there. I think you should encourage your employees to post and engage on LinkedIn. I know it's not perfect. You can't just force it. It's not going to work that well. But you should have a CEO, or the execs should also be posting on LinkedIn and other channels, because that's going to set the standard, and then employees might follow through as well. I think it's just keeping it simple. Have your employees post, create a podcast, a live show, create content from that. You could take that, 40-minute hour show and create a bunch of clips off of it, and distribute that. I don't think you need to go crazy. I think you need to start small and then expand from there. A lot of companies just try to do too much and they burn out, or they don't have enough resources. Start small, get something out, start seeing traction, and then scale your media company.
That's good advice. Sort of taking the minimum viable product approach, getting some quick wins, and then continuing to build on top of that. Cool. All right. Love your take on that. All right, Tim. we're gonna hit you with a tough one now. I don't know. Did you have the opportunity to watch the movie, the Jordan Peele movie, Get Out? Came out like 5, 6 years ago.
I actually, was there a cat in it or something? I think I do remember seeing that.
Okay, so I'll send you a clip about it afterward. But Get
Okay.
Out, it's like a thriller. It's kind of scary. But they had this
Okay.
concept of the sunken place, where this guy was essentially trapped in someone else's body. For marketers, I see marketers as being trapped in their version of the sunken place, where they're trying to transition from being focused on demand capture to actually doing more demand creation. They're trying to transition from like gated content and low intent MQLs to ungated content and, hey, high intent hand raisers who actually want a demo. So for marketers who are saying, hey, boss, we need to make this transition, what that means is that in the short term, their MQLs, as they stop focusing on pure lead gen, their MQLs could drop fairly sharply. And the pipeline that's going to come from the demand creation might not yet have manifested. It might take a few months to start showing up. How do marketers navigate this sunken place, this difficult place where the leads aren't coming in, but the pipeline from the new programs haven't taken off?
Yeah. Um, so as much as I'd like to say just rip off the Band-Aid, and you can't, because a lot of systems are built off of those leads and MQLs that high volume. I mean, there's plenty of companies out there that are doing 100 the 1,000 MQLs and leads a day, and their team, their SDRs, their AEs, they're used to that and they're built off of that. You can't just shut it off, or it's just gonna be chaos. It really would. What you need to do is start small. So let's just say, like, all right, let's just say, for example, 100,000. We're spending $100,000 on lead gen and the content downloads and all that. Let's take 25% of that and do the demand creation and things that aren't going to be attributable yet, but we can start seeing differences in 3 months. That way you need to ease it down. You just need to ease into it, because if you just turn things off, what's going to happen, and what always happens, is if the CEO or executive team isn't the one making this happen, things will get dicey, and they will probably say, "No, let's revert back," because they have a lot of systems already built out. But if you start small, start seeing traction, then you can say, "All right, let's spend 25% of the budget. Oh, we're starting to see some traction. Let's do 50%. Let's do," and then you can kind of whittle it down. If you just go cold turkey, it's not going to be good.
Fair enough. That makes sense. No cold turkey. I get that. I was looking at something Kyle Lacey talked about today on LinkedIn, and he was talking about how much of your budget. I think this actually was on Pep Laya's podcast, and he was talking about how much of your budget should be spent on. He called it uh, revenue marketing versus brand marketing. Some people might
Mm.
call it demand capture versus demand creation. But in your mind, and I think his argument was you should spend 60%, 60 to 80% of your budget on demand capture, things that are directly attributable to bringing in pipeline right away, and then spend 20, 30% on brand marketing. In your mind, Tim, we call this the demand scale. How are you allocating your 100% of the budget? How much are you spending on immediate term call to action demand capture, jump into our funnel, versus slightly longer term education of the marketplace, demand creation?
The truth is, it does depend, because if your category has a lot of demand, you could spend more on the demand capture part, right? And you can see good results on it. If there's no demand, let's just say, trying to think of a good example. There's no, like, for us, for Directive, we are only for software and technology companies. No one types in marketing agency for tech. They type in marketing agency. Well, there's some that say like marketing agency for SaaS, but there's not a lot of volume compared to like marketing agency or PPC agency or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
We can't spend a ton of money on Google in demand capture like that because there's not enough demand for what we don't want to go after people that are dentists type of
Mm-hmm.
thing, which is a lot of the searches. So it does depend on the demand in your category. Then from there, let's just say there's a lot of demand. I do think 30 to 40% is a pretty good number. It just depends on the performance of it. That's the only kind of like big caveat because there's a lot of companies that should be doing 80% because there's not a lot of demand. It really does depend on the demand for the category, unfortunately.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, cool. So, Tim, going into the new year, thinking specifically now of that demand creation portion of your budget, right? What 5 things should marketers be including in their demand creation plan for 2023 and why?
I think one, because I think people just need there's a lot of blank space on it that's really gray right now. Is like call it what you want, but like B2B influencers.
Hmm.
I do think there's a big space there. I think it's very undervalued right now. You could probably get some decent people for like a lot very cheap right now. I think if you can figure that out, I think there's a lot of space there to make things happen. That could be, specifically sponsoring them. That could be I've seen a lot of companies put them like in their ads. I think there's value there too because if someone sees them, they're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I think that's definitely one you should think more about. I do think TikTok's another one,
Hmm.
and it's less about TikTok, but the content format's not going away. Uh, YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, all copied TikTok. So I think there's a lot of B2B companies need to figure out how to create short form, vertical, mobile first content, and TikTok's just the best place to do that right now. So I think that's a big opportunity. If you're not doing, if you're not doing LinkedIn, figure out, assuming your buy is there, which most are in B2B, more on LinkedIn, spend more time, more budget, more resources on figuring out LinkedIn if you haven't. It's just the biggest opportunity for B2B, and there's a lot of companies that aren't doing it like well at all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'd also probably spend more. I'd probably budget in whether it's headcount or some sort of resources just to get more content.
Mm.
Content like good content, because the biggest thing you'll run into is just like frequency, and I fall into this trap too, where you put out the same ad or the same content over and over again, and it just the frequency gets too high, and
Mm.
I think you just spend more time getting better content or more content, you see a lot more value out of it. And then fifth,
So we've got influencers, we've got
yep,
TikTok, mastering short form video, more time on LinkedIn, have some sort of content creation headcount.
and probably I don't like this answer because it's like it just seems like everyone's doing it, but there's obviously huge opportunity still there. It's just a podcast or a live show
Mm.
because you can create content from it too. It's
Mm.
one of those rare times where podcasts and live shows are more distributable than ever because you could take a 40-minute show, get like 10 1-minute clips out of it, and just
Mm-hmm.
distribute it everywhere. It's very interesting.
Got it. Got it. It's been around for a little bit, but it still works, like you said, especially if
Yeah.
I suppose you either niche down really sharply or
Yeah.
have maybe a unique sort of approach to it.
Exactly.
Awesome. This has been great. All right, cool. We've got just one more question for you, Tim, on the demand wars, and we're calling this section Reality Roulette. So, you've been charged with remixing an existing reality show for B2B, where all the cast members are B2B marketers, right? Or it's framed within a company anyway that involves B2B marketing. So, is there a reality show, or what reality show would you remix, and what might that show look like?
Hmm. Have you ever watched The Challenge?
Yeah.
I think it's on MTV. It's like a reality show, but it's like they do a bunch of competitions. At the end, they win. It's usually like $1 million. Um, but a lot of the people come from like different reality shows, like Survivor or Big Brother or something like that. But I think that one's very interesting because they do a lot of competitions,
Yeah.
and I think for B2B marketers, that could be very interesting to make these competitions, and it could be very, very like marketing specific, or it could be like physical specific, like the show is. Um, but they also like live in the same house, so there's like a lot of
Hmm.
tension there. So it's a very interesting show dynamic. But I think for B2B, that'd be a very interesting show because you have all the competitions. You're going. I guess like the $1 million could be like, oh, $1 million budget or something like that, and the competitions could be like creating content or demand creation. Like, oh, how long does it take to, or does your content do better with that? There's probably a lot of different ways to go about it. But I think the nature of the show with the competition, I think, would be very interesting.
Yo, I like that a lot. That's
Yeah.
pretty creative, and someone's gonna do that before too long. This is great. All right, cool. Tim, you just survived the gauntlet of the demand
Oh,
wars. Well done, my friend. Thank you so much for jumping on. I appreciate it, folks. We've been talking to the never boring, semi funny senior director of marketing at Directive, Tim Davidson. Tim, thanks for being here.
thanks for having me. This is awesome. Very much appreciate it.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, folks, we will see you on the next episode of The Demand Wars. Bye for now.